Welcome to Second Take, the show that focuses on the issues behind the news. Zimbabwe's government has given foreign firms, including mines and banks, a 14-day ultimatum to submit acceptable plans on how they propose to transfer majority stakes to local owners or risk losing permits. Martin Zhuwakinyu joins me in studio to discuss the implications of this law. Welcome, Martin.
Oh, thank you, Shannon.
Now, if these foreign firms pulled out of Zimbabwe owing to this indigenization law, what consequences would we be likely to see?
Well, to be honest with you, I don't think we are going to see any mining companies pulling out of Zimbabwe anytime soon. Look at Impala Platinum, for instance, and Aquarius Platinum, and many other foreign mining companies, Caledonia, Mana Africa, Metal and Gold Zimbabwe, and many other companies. They've invested billions of dollars into the mining industry in Zimbabwe in the last few years. Yeah, and I don't think they are going to simply walk away from that investment. I think they are going to be in Zimbabwe for the long haul.
So it's not really something we have to be concerned about?
No, I don't think that question is going to arise. And the Zimbabwean government knows that, that they are not simply going to abandon their investments. I think what they are trying to do is to extract more concessions from the mining companies. What happened in South Africa, for instance, was that there was a process of negotiation between the mining companies and the government, and Labour was also involved, when they were talking about empowerment in the mining industry. But negotiation is not something that is, in the vocabulary of the Zimbabwean government. They are trying to extract as many concessions as possible. I think that is what is happening here. But in the unlikely event that some companies do pull out of Zimbabwe, as you asked me, I think what we are going to see is what has happened in the mining industry during the last few years. Take the gold mining industry, for instance. At its peak, it produced something like 29 tons a year. But in 2009, the production figure was something like 5 tons a year. That was a huge fall. That was simply because there was no money to invest in the mining industry, and that's precisely what we are going to see. It's not only the gold mining sector that suffered because of, lack of investment, during the period when Zimbabwe, was experiencing all these difficulties. The asbestos mines, for instance, they were a major source of foreign currency, during their heyday. But when investors deserted Zimbabwe, they virtually wound up. And the same thing happened to Zisco, for instance, the steel mining the steel making company. And this iron ore mining subsidiary, BIMCO, the Buho iron mining company, it virtually shut shop, So in the event that, the mining companies are going to leave Zimbabwe, I think we are going to see the mining industry virtually shut up in Zimbabwe. Yeah.
Now, Finance Minister Tendai Biti said in his second-year budget review statement that Zimbabwe was still on course to achieve its GDP growth rate of 9.3%, with mining at the epicenter of this growth.
Yes.
Now, how likely is this law to affect that?
Well, he is talking about a 9.3% growth rate for the current year. And should any mining company decide to leave Zimbabwe, that's not going to happen within the next 12 months, for instance. So I think we are still going to see the Zimbabwean economy grow by about 9% this year, whatever happens. Okay.
Now, Zimbabwe's indigenization and empowerment minister has rejected most of the empowerment plans as being unacceptable. Are these rejections justified? And what constitutes an acceptable plan then, in his view?
Well, it depends on where you sit, what an acceptable plan is. Look at these mining companies. Impala Platinum, it has got a presence in South Africa. Anglo-American Platinum has got a presence in South Africa. Mzee Kumalosi Metal and Gold has got a presence in South Africa. And the other mining companies, for instance, Mana Africa, which is headed up by Kala Mpinga. Mpinga used to work in South Africa for Anglo-American. So they are very much familiar, with the South African process. 26% ownership by blacks. To them, that is very much acceptable, So, I mean, to many people, the South African situation is acceptable. And the mining companies, 26% ownership would be acceptable. But then we are talking about the Zimbabwean government. To them, 51% ownership is acceptable. But whether or not it's reasonable, I don't know, but I certainly don't think it is reasonable, yeah.
Now, the law requires that 51%, as you said, of any significant business be owned by locals by 2015. How does the government expect the shareholders to pay for this?
Well, if you look at the Indiginisation Act, it says all foreign mining companies or white mining companies must either sell or cede 51% of the shareholding. So if you can't find a buyer, then you simply have to cede that shareholding to government. Yeah, I think it's as simple as that. And as I said earlier on, they realize that it's not going to be easy for indigenous Zimbabweans to raise this kind of shareholding. I mean, look at what happened during the last 10 years. I mentioned the case of the asbestos mining companies owned by Mutumwa Mawere. Those companies were grabbed by the Zimbabwe government. And what happened afterwards? They simply couldn't find enough money to invest into those companies. Look at what happened at BIMCO, the iron ore mining company. They also couldn't find money to invest in those companies. I mean, the same applies to the coal mining companies, there is only one at the moment. They couldn't find people within Zimbabwe to raise enough money to invest in those mining companies. So the government knows that, locals are not going to be able to raise enough money to invest in the mining industry. So clearly, as far as I'm concerned, all they're trying to do is to extract as many concessions as possible, from the mining companies. I know some of them have said that instead of giving away or giving up 51% of the shareholding, they would invest in social infrastructure, for instance, building schools, building roads, building dams, and so on and so forth. But the government is saying, no, that is not enough. We want 51%. I think it's a process of negotiation. It's just like with the unions here in South Africa. When they realistically expect a 10% pay rise, they'll start off, demanding 25%. So I think they are doing precisely the same here. They are going to come down eventually.
So you do think that their fixation on 51% could sometime be lowered maybe to 30%, or what we consider acceptable?
Absolutely, yeah. Okay. Absolutely, yeah. I think, it's a bargaining gimmick that we are seeing here. In fact, most of the companies do know that. Only today, Impala Platinum's chief executive, David Brown, he said that he doesn't have a problem with involving indigenous Zimbabweans in the mining industry, but then he says 51% is problematic. I think that is the position of most of the mining companies. They know 51% is unreasonable. They're trying to push the figure down as much as possible. And I think, that's probably what the Zimbabwe government wants. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your insight, Martin.
That's a pleasure.
That's the show for today. Join us again next time for more news and insight into what's happening in the mining world.